Our special investigation continues. New revelations, more evidence about the true origins of the coronavirus pandemic. As we stated last week, we are not accusing anyone of intentionally creating and unleashing this virus on the world. But we have 2 million dead, over 400,000 here in America, economic and social catastrophe not seen for 100 years. If there is even a remote possibility that it started in a lab from work commissioned by our own government, work that as far as we know is still going on, don't you think we should not just investigate that in an open way, but make it our top priority? If we don't, we could be here doing this all over again with another pandemic in another couple of years. And after the new evidence we'll show you tonight, evidence that comes directly from our own National Institutes of Health, any reasonable person will conclude that the idea that the pandemic did originate in the Wuhan lab and was the result of a project initiated and funded by our own government. That idea seems not like a remote possibility, but a near certainty. On Tuesday, Vice President Kamala Harris took her second dose of the vaccine at the National Institutes of Health. She was introduced by NIH Director Francis Collins, with Dr. Fauci, head of one of those institutes, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, or NIAID, in the front row. Here's part of what she said.
Growing up, my mother, our mother, would go, we always knew that Mommy was going to this place called Bethesda. Mommy's going to Bethesda. Now we're living in California, my mother would go to Bethesda. And of course what she was doing is she was coming here to NIH. And she was in the biochemical endocrinology study section. She was a peer reviewer. That's what my mother did. She reviewed grants.
That's how NIH research grants are made, peer-reviewed. The Vice President's mother did it for breast cancer research. But then in one particular area, in one particular year, there was a change. In December 2017, a new policy was put into place that required research involving potential pandemic pathogens to go through a secret HHS panel. Soon after, this panel secretly approved 2 viral gain-of-function experiments. After an outcry, officials said they would work to improve transparency. But why the secrecy in the first place? This is research that the man on stage with the Vice President, Francis Collins, and the man in the front row, Dr. Fauci, had proudly championed just a few years before. In 2011, in the Washington Post, they described gain-of-function research as a risk worth taking. They said that important information and insights can come from generating, their words, a potentially dangerous virus in the laboratory. But in 2014, the Obama administration placed a moratorium on this kind of research, citing recent biosafety incidents at federal research facilities. And to be clear, it was not just a ban on new experiments being carried out by government scientists, or even here in America. It was a ban on funding them anywhere. That ban was announced in October 2014 with a request that existing projects be paused. But as we showed you last week, the NIAID carried on funding this research, regardless. $666,000 in May 2014, before the ban. $630,000 in 2015, after the ban. $611,000 in 2016, after the ban. $597,000 in 2017, after the ban. The ban was lifted in December 2017, but 3 payments were made by the Institute totaling more than $1.8 million while the ban was in place. And as we shall see, those were crucial years. The NIAID grant money was awarded to EcoHealth Alliance, run by this man, Peter Daszak. He established, working with Shizheng Li, head of the Infectious Diseases Unit at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that the 2002 SARS epidemic started with a bat coronavirus originating in Guangdong Province, China. The NIAID wanted to know where the next one might come from and whether there was a chance that it could mutate into a virus that wasn't just zoonotic, animals infecting humans, but could actually be passed from human to human through the air via the respiratory system. That's what the project, contracted to Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance, was designed to find out. And then it was subcontracted to Peter Daszak's SARS collaborator, Shizheng Li, in the Wuhan Institute. She had been busy. In 2012 and 2013, her team made multiple visits to the Tongguan mine near Mojiang in Kunming, Yunnan province, where 6 miners who'd been cleaning up the mine by shoveling bat feces became sick with a SARS-like illness, of which 3 of them died. The Wuhan Institute team found 152 different bat coronaviruses in that mine. They checked to see how many were associated with a new SARS-type illness. The answer? 1. Here it is, BT-CoV 4991. At that exact time, our own NIAID was paying the Wuhan Institute to answer this question. Could a bat coronavirus that causes a SARS-like illness become so contagious that it could be transmitted human to human, what the project called emergence and spillover potential? Remember, the miners in that cave were each infected separately. They didn't infect anyone else, not their families, no one in their communities, not the medical staff who looked after them. So the Wuhan Institute knew that this natural bat virus could infect humans at high doses, could cause a SARS-like illness that could be fatal, and was not very transmissible between humans. It was the perfect match for the NIAID grant asking them to explore emergence potential. All they needed to do was use the tools of viral gain-of-function research explicitly detailed in the grant. The crucial part is on screen now. Use reverse genetics to see what changes to the naturally occurring virus would make it capable of infecting human cells easily and efficiently in the lab. Is that what they did? Well, as is so often the case, the cover-up can illuminate the truth. Last year, the Wuhan Institute published a paper saying that the pandemic virus was very similar to one they had in their library, RATG13. They said they just found it. But if you run that sequence through GenBank, a kind of genetic database, there's exactly one 100% match, BT-CoV 4991, the virus they found years before, the one from the mine, the only one out of the 152 that related to a new strain of SARS. Why didn't they reveal that? Why did they change the name? It's the closest known bat virus to the pandemic virus. The variations are almost entirely in 2 places. In technical language, the spike receptor binding domain and the furin cleavage site. In plain English, the places that affect how contagious it is and how effectively it can enter human cells in the respiratory system. Those are the exact places in the viral sequence where gain-of-function techniques would be applied if, to pick a random example, you were funded by the NIAID to research bat coronaviruses to explore emergence or spillover potential. That exact work was even described in the progress report we showed you last week, tied directly to the NIAID grant. They analyzed bat coronaviruses and sequenced their genetic information. They then built various chimeras, genetically engineered new viruses, man-made in the lab. They infected human cells with them in the lab, and they then showed that their man-made viruses could replicate as a functional virus. The crucial question is this: were they doing all that with the virus they found in the mine, the virus that caused the SARS-like illness? The match between that virus and the work commissioned by NIAID is so perfect, it's impossible to believe they weren't. We now know that workers in the Wuhan lab got COVID in the fall of 2019. They were the first identified cases of the outbreak. And what is the alternative explanation? Those directly implicated here, the Chinese regime and Peter Daszak, who is in an outrageous conflict of interest, the only US representative on the current WHO investigation, they're pushing a natural origin theory. But to swallow that, you'd have to believe in a laughably implausible set of coincidences. Multiple different species of bats in Yunnan province would have had to infect each other and some other unknown animal. Then either these animals or an infected human would need to have traveled 1,000 miles without infecting anyone until they got to Wuhan. The virus, in its first incarnation before any mutations, would have been 10 to 20 times more infectious than any previously observed virus occurring in nature. And most incredibly of all, the infected animal or human would have somehow chosen to make their 1,000-mile trek to the only place in all of China with a lab that for years had been working on the viruses it was already infected with. In February last year, the Chinese regime replaced the head of the Wuhan Institute of Virology with the head of their bioweapons program. Vital evidence was destroyed, as NBC News reported this week.
NBC News confirming a Wuhan Institute of Virology database with 20,000 entries, which may have offered important clues about what the Chinese were studying, was taken down last spring. A senior lab official has said it was removed for security reasons.
For a year, the Chinese regime has blocked investigations. But they're not the only government engaged in a cover-up. For 2 weeks, we've been reaching out to the NIH and the NIAID to respond to the story we broadcast last week. On Friday, the NIH did finally respond with this statement. We asked them to comment on this project, commissioned in 2014. On screen now, you'll see the project number and the key sentence specifying gain-of-function research. The NIH statement says, the research supported under the grant to EcoHealth Alliance did not involve the enhancement of the pathogenicity or transmissibility of the viruses studied. But here's the project that their statement links to. It's a different project with a different number. They're right to say that this project doesn't include gain-of-function research, but that's not the one we asked about. The one we asked about, as we showed you, does include gain-of-function research. And worse still, look at this. In their statement, the NIH said, for information about the distribution to sub-awardees, please visit usaspending.gov and switch from prime awards to sub-awards in the upper right corner. Well, we did exactly that. And look what we found. 6 payments to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And look at the project number listed against 5 of those payments. Not the one that the NIH used for their denial, but the one that unquestionably includes gain-of-function research. And the same NIAID project ID listed in the Wuhan Institute's November 2017 progress report, which literally describes the gain-of-function experiments they used to do exactly what the NIH denied they did in their statement, enhance the pathogenicity or transmissibility of the viruses studied. The statement we received from the NIH is totally deceptive. At the top of their statement, they say, this is attributable to NIH generally, not a specific individual. Well, that's not good enough. We're talking about the origins of a pandemic that has killed 2 million people and devastated the world. Did Francis Collins, head of the NIH, approve this statement before it went out? Will he stand behind it now, even after we have demonstrated how deceptive it is? Will Dr. Fauci stand behind it? Here's where we stand tonight. You can blame China for the lab accident, the leak. But lab accidents happen all over the world, including here in America. That's exactly why the Obama administration banned gain-of-function research. Once the leak happened and the virus was circulating in Wuhan, you can certainly blame the Chinese regime for their cover-up and for allowing an outbreak to become a global pandemic. But the origin of this virus, the reason it exists, the reason it's so contagious and infectious, the responsibility for that is increasingly clear. These 2 men who decided to ignore the Obama administration's ban on research that they said was a risk worth taking. Of course, Dr. Collins or Dr. Fauci didn't create the pandemic on purpose. That is obviously ludicrous. They've dedicated their careers to fighting disease. But there's now very little doubt that one of their weapons of choice in that fight did lead to this pandemic. And actually, that wasn't an unthinkable accident and complete surprise. They were warned it could happen. Not only warned, but explicitly asked by the Obama administration to stop this kind of research, to stop doing it and to stop funding it. But they did it anyway. For that, surely they must be accountable. I mean, who else should we hold accountable? Let's not be partisan about this. Joe Biden banned this research, or at least the administration of which he was vice president did in 2014. But Collins and Fauci ignored that ban and continued to fund the research, which almost certainly ended up creating this pandemic. Why isn't Joe Biden furious about that? Why hasn't the president or Jen Psaki or Dr. Collins or Dr. Fauci been asked about this? Are we still funding this stuff? Is it still happening in some lab somewhere, either in China or anywhere else? Why is NIH putting out deceptive statements about their role? Isn't this pandemic bad enough without us potentially funding and incubating the next one. We'll post